What's up, T-Tam fam? Eric here. Sunday, August 11th, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Appreciate you guys coming in, checking out this episode. Kind of like a quick recap of, you know, my 20s, which was a time of, you know, freedom, mistakes, exploring, finding out what I didn't know. Um, it wasn't about one big moment. It was, you know, a lot of small moments and choices that I made that kind of shaped who I was, during that time. Um, Overall, it was, you know, me not understanding, certain things about adulthood because I didn't know. Still being, not tied into my emotions. And, with that being said, it was, something that everything was at surface level. Still playing the chameleon role, trying to find out where, I fit in certain places and, different friend groups. There were patterns that I was developing, but I didn't quite understand. So, with with that being said, it was something where I wasn't self-aware, um, and I just kind of rolled with everything. Um, how I was willing to continue to go out on a limb for others and not really put myself in any sort of priority, if you will. Um, and that's something I did for a very, very long time. Um, and realizing that, I had placed blame on others rather than taking accountability for myself. And I can get into the accountability aspect of this later, but um, with that kind of being said, it's overall, it's something I didn't understand, and realistically, it's something that, it's something that I wouldn't understand for quite some time because I didn't grow up with it. Um, I didn't know how to approach it, and those would be for later episodes. Looking back at the relationships I had, losing my virginity at 19, kind of a late bloomer, and then after that, just really not, just kind of bouncing relationship to relationship. I was engaged in my mid 20s, and again, that was surface level stuff. It wasn't like I knew I always wanted to get married and start a family. I just didn't know when or with who. And, I went on, I didn't, I went on, basically I was thinking of the wrong head, right? And when it comes down to that and being surface level, you never truly find out what, your potential partner will be. And, and have those talks. But, um, that was an interesting experience. I was engaged for close to like 2 years, I believe it was. And then, we kind of had a major falling out, primarily because of, we were very volatile together, especially when you put alcohol in it. So, needless to say that, there's some things that, how I handled it, I'm not proud of, but then again, I didn't know any better. And, being, thinking I was mature, but then my actions were showing that I wasn't and not recognizing at that time, um, it's like, oh, yeah, I'll just get a ring, you know what I mean? Oh, don't worry about it. And one of the distinct conversations is, when are we going to start planning for this? And here I am thinking to myself, well, what do you mean planning? We're just going to go get married, and for a long time, that's kind of what I believed, at that point in time because I didn't know any better. Um, and at that point, she didn't, explain, been like, hey, this isn't kind of how this goes. Anyways, that relationship kind of fizzled um, because of it. And, with that being said, it's, bouncing from relationship to relationship afterwards was just a filler. It wasn't, didn't really mean anything because, you know, my blame towards everything or everybody else should have been blamed at myself, meaning I was the problem. And that took me, again, a very long time to try and figure that out. There wasn't, you know, I've had wake up calls before, and I became sober in 2006. That was one kind of moment where it was either um, I could die, could go to jail, or I could be a productive member of society. And at that point in time, personally, it was choosing to be the productive member of society. So quitting everything, the drinking, the drugs, and all of that, and that was really kind of one of my first wake up calls of how change within myself needed to occur. And um, and unfortunately, I just, really was hyper focused on that. Um, and that was the only thing. Like, I was in a relationship, um, and, with that, um, because of my drinking and my actions, that relationship, didn't work out. I then went back to um, the person I was engaged to, and that's kind of when, again, I made some choices while drinking, and um, put me into this shit or get off the pot type of situation. And legal matters were brought into it, and something I'm not proud of. However, I went through it, um, and you know, basically it was like, no, you're gonna deal with this because of the choice that you made. And that's something I think about, every single day now is is being that productive member of society to this day. So, in some weird sort of way, I was grateful for that because I was heading down a path of self-destruction and, could have ended very poorly for me. Um, but, again, having to wake up and face the music of what your choices have done, it's tough because no matter what happens, life doesn't stop. Um, so that was really where I kind of learned about awareness and how that talking about what's going on when in your day-to-day life or how you're feeling, that was really kind of that. And that was, again, that was in my mid-20s, um, where 26, 25, no, 26, 27, um, you know, I had to, you know, have that realization that, this is what life is going to be, and accepting that to be able to move forward. And, with that, again, I knew my drinking patterns and I knew what happened when I drank. Um, but I didn't realize the emotional patterns that I had developed, over that time because, again, the fuck your feelings generation. I don't think I wasn't thinking about that, and I wasn't like, and if I wasn't thinking about it myself, I sure as hell wasn't thinking about it for um, my my partner or my girlfriend or whomever, um, that I happened to be with at that point in time, because I was very selfish. I'll admit that. Um, you know, Doing the things that I wanted to do because I could, because it was like, hey, you have to start doing this. But I did find that talking really helped me um, get through the day to day. And sometimes it was conversations with myself, just having that simply because um, nobody else was around. I didn't really trust anybody to talk to. I didn't talk to any of my family. And, I mean, they knew what was going on, but again, it wasn't publicized, so to speak. Um, it was me being, um, just kind of handling it on my own. Um, and I think I went to a shrink once, and I didn't like the experience personally. Um, and then when I became sober, I had a mentor, who happened to be my uncle. He had been, sober for quite some time. He had a problem early in his day, and now he's a holy roller, as I like to call him. No judgment, but that's what he is. But that wasn't my style. He was like, oh, you have to go to church, you have to do this, you have to do that, and here's the thing: is I took bits and pieces of what he told me, and I applied it to my day to day to be able to stay sober. Um, does this work for everybody? No, not at all. Some people need that structure. They need to, whether it's see a priest or somebody within a group every single day to kind of make them whole. I get it. For me, I was able to take everything that I had learned from him and put it into my day to day. And it was something he didn't agree with, but, and, we ended up parting ways between mentor and um, uh, alcoholic. So it was, I don't, I have no ill will against him or any sort of resentment. But again, in my life, I've learned to grab bits and pieces and have it, take what I feel is important and mold it into my day to day, and that's what I did. How to become sober. So I didn't read the 12 steps. Didn't go. Excuse me. I didn't fully go by the 12 steps, but excuse me. Um, but it took bits and pieces from that. The big book took bits and pieces from that. Just being sober took bits and pieces from that, and that's how I was able to, maintain my sobriety for so long, is because I took bits and pieces from integral parts and applied it to, my day to day. I still push things down, just because that's what I had always done. But in the sense of, I didn't hold it down there. It was something that I kind of suppressed and then verbalized, later on with whom I was talking to. And the funny thing is it didn't really matter. Like, if I felt comfortable with somebody, I would, just go and talk to them. Um, why? Because I felt it was important. Um, and it wasn't doing this to get sympathy votes or all of that, but it was just somebody, maybe because they didn't know my whole story, so I was able to tell them what had gone on without being like, oh yeah, well, what would your family say about this? So um, and here I am still learning to verbalize, excuse me, everything that I come across. Um, because growth isn't a straight line. It's sometimes you take, two steps forward and you take three back. But, I was learning how to do that dance at that particular time. And that was really, telling myself, hey, not everything's going to be perfect. Um, you are going to still continue to hit speed bumps in life, and, the road that you're going down is going to be bumpy. It's that simple. Um, and that's where, my mental strength improved because if I wasn't locked in mentally, then this would last. It's kind of that simple. So, going through all of it and sitting there 27 years old and being like, what the hell did I do to myself? How bad did I fuck myself? And it was pretty bad. Um, you know, Going that stretch and span of 5 years with troubles, um, legal troubles, that's not fun. I don't recommend it. um, but if you've gone through certain things like where, oh, things are awesome, I can't believe it, and then all of a sudden you have a bad week comes up and boom, everything goes to shit. You have to kind of prepare for that, and that's really what I kind of did was um, it was damage control. And becoming sober and now having to live a new life, so to speak, because I only knew how to live the bar life or the club life. Excuse me. Fixing myself, looking back at it now, was one of the slowest processes because I didn't fully understand it. And when you're not in tune with yourself, it's going to take you a lot longer to understand certain things. If you're not self-aware, it's going to take you a lot longer to understand certain things. So, um, just remember, give yourself some grace. It's okay. Simply because you're not going to figure it out right away. No matter what, you can run through 1,000 different scenarios and have 1,000 different outcomes. But, you know, until you experience that, you really only have things that you can kind of go by. So, um, it was tough because there were certain times where I did find myself being alone, wondering, man, I'm such a good dude. Like, what is going on? But not understanding the fact of, my actions did the damage because of the choices that I made. So, from there, it was about acceptance. And I went through a lot of it. I called, you know, family, friends, exes, and, kind of said, hey, listen, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my actions. I'm sorry for what I put you through. I'm just going to be better. And from that point on, like, I felt a certain relief come over me once I had told those that I hurt, that I cared about, either currently or at one time. Um, that was tough because, you know, having to sit there and say to yourself, oh, well, you know what, they were the problem, screw them. You know what, they're the ones that had the issues, but essentially it's me. I had all the issues, and I didn't recognize them, nor were they brought to my attention either. So now living a sober life was an adjustment because of I didn't have anything to dull the pain. Excuse me. I didn't have anything to dull the pain. And when you don't have something to dull the pain, hearing the truth was shocking, I would say. Simply because we are, in today's society, it's, the yes ma'am, yes men, no ma'am type situations. And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, they'll yes you to death. And it's just like, no, I needed honesty. I needed to hear that constructive criticism, or I needed to hear my faults so I could sit there and be like, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't do this. So, and my growth pattern, my growth on becoming sober grew. Um, it just took a lot longer. I got my chips, I got up to 6 months, and then I got to a year, and from there, like I stopped going because sitting there and hearing the same stories from the same people over and over again, like I don't take anything away from it. It just wasn't my thing. Um, but those classes are put there for those who can take it, and that is their thing because they want to have that guidance. They want to be able to have that. Okay, well, this is the way that it is. Um, but also understanding your growth aspect and realizing that for me it was a very, 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 very slow process. Um, so it was, how do I handle this sober life with everything that I've done, and where the majority of stuff was done by, excuse me, whether it be, a lot of it was done in person and behind closed doors, and to be able to have that drive, and I didn't have that type of drive back then because I didn't know any better. Um, so that's why my growth throughout my 20s was at a snail's pace because I didn't understand the concept, not one bit. Um, the other thing, like I said, the other thing that was keeping me somewhat sane was football and playing football and being able to get that aggression out every time we practice, every time we play the game. So, I mean, with that being said, it's important that you recognize early of what your shortcomings are and how can you navigate through them um, without self-sabotaging yourself. So, with me is as, once I became sober and facing things honestly, that was a shock, to say the least, um, to the system because I didn't know how to. Did not know how to. But again, it's something that I learned, year in and year out. But even from that point, it still took me quite a bit of time to, if you put it all together, it would have worked. Absolutely, excuse me, would not have worked. Um, so again, I was just starting to quote unquote fix myself. And because I was seeing things in a clearer light, it made things that I was accustomed to boring because I didn't have that extra stimulation or that extra motivation, so to speak, um, when it came down to it. Um, and my friends, they supported me. I will say that. They were kind of shaking their head at me, but overall, they supported me. But now as I'm coming into my 30s, you would have thought things would have changed. Well, stay tuned. That's where episode 6 comes in, and this is where the real work begins. It's definitely not pretty, but it's real. Um, you know, if you had one moment that you could reflect upon, for this episode of, you know, like when you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? You know, do you see somebody happy? Do you see somebody sad? Do you see somebody angry? Do you see somebody disappointed, confused, whatever? You know, um, leave a comment. I'd love to find out and um, see what we can do to kind of work with you, through this because, you know, in this day and age, I will say, social media has a huge presence, and that's what I'm here for. Is again, is to be able to help one person. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter when, um, but just be able to help, that one person over and over, to be able to have them understand that you can come back. Um, and with me being kind of in the pits of hell, um, because of the choices that I made, then that's what I did. But I've always come back. Um, I've never let it define me, um, and not early, not mid, and not now. It's never defined me to be like, oh, hey, I'm an alcoholic. Um, Only when I have to. Like if I go to a meeting, I will gladly say, hi, my name's Eric and I'm an alcoholic. So, those years were very, very wild, to say the least. Um, but in the next episode, we'll kind of get more into what had happened between moving and living situations and girlfriends and all of that. So, um, if you haven't yet, hit that little button, like and subscribe, to my channel here. We show up every Sunday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I appreciate all of you that have, shown me the love with, checking my videos out because that's what matters. And like I said, if I can reach one of you and just understand that you're not alone, then I've done my job. That's really what I came to do here. But again, like and subscribe, hit that channel. Again, we will see you on this episode airing Sunday, August 11th, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. And I'll see you on the following Sunday, the 18th. And I'm going to try and bring in, that's when, bring in some real, heavy stuff to, see how you guys can relate to it. Well, that said, you enjoy your Sunday. Kill it. We'll catch you on the next one.